Light in August by William Faulkner, one of my favorite Faulkner novels. I just, every time I read it, I get more out of it, and it's really a deep pleasure to read. I get a cathartic experience out of reading it, and I don't quite know why, because the main character, Joe Christmas, is a half black man, we think, or he thinks, more importantly, and he could easily pass for white if he wanted to. He brings a lot of trouble upon himself, and ultimately his own death, I believe, due to the fact that he will not stand up for himself when it would be just as easy for him to say he passes white. He refuses to do that. Traumatic stress syndrome, very hard life, abusive, very abusive. He was left to an orphanage and grew up like that, was brought up, finally adopted to a religious family, you could say. And he just, Joe has a chip on his shoulder from the get-go through the end of the novel. I'd like to get into some, I think this is like the third or fourth video I've done, and I need to organize them better. I am sort of jumping around because I thought it'd be interesting to do that, as Faulkner does with his plotting. With every novel, it's he doesn't give you everything at once. It makes you work for it, and that is one of the reasons it's so satisfying to read and discover. I've done it. I told them I would. So did he kill his stepfather? Didn't he? I mean, Faulkner never, he does this a lot in his novels too. He'll state an event or show an event, but still you never really know. We never come back to see if his stepfather survived the beating about the head with a furniture leg. But that stemmed from an argument they were having over a horror that Joe Christmas did not know was a horror, thought it was a serious relationship. He was going to ask this woman to marry him. And there's two examples of Faulkner almost using the F word in Light in August. The first is on page 204, and that's a mere 10 pages of after his father. Then the girl is calling him the N-word, and so page 194, Christmas has killed his stepfather, and a mere 10 pages later, the whore he was going to ask to marry him is calling him the N-word. And again, it is on page 208 that Faulkner also almost uses the F word. Just interesting. I mean, it was written in 1936, 32, and it's funny, after the obscenity charges of Ulysses in the 30s that coincided with Prohibition. I guess that's where I'm going to leave this, except for to say I'd like to talk also about Joanna Burden, who Joe Christmas ends up with. She's an old spinster, raised religiously again, and she brings about her own demise as well. They have a strange relationship. Joe finds himself going into her house. Of course, nobody locks the doors back then. People are walking in and out of Gail Hightower's house quite often. Byron Bunch, for one, is all waking him up, standing over his bed while he's sleeping, things like that. But we were talking about Joanna's violence on page 262 and 263 with Joe Christmas. She lays hands on him first, and she lay on the bed on her side, her head turned and looking up at him across her bleeding mouth. Maybe it would be better if we both were dead, she